Alan Steinfeld, welcome to Ancient Mysteries on Earth. Thank you so much for being here. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm great, and ancient mysteries is the most exciting thing I think we can talk about, besides the future mysteries and the UFOs and all that. But it's all connected. You know that.
It is all connected, right? And that's why I wanted to bring you on because with Alan's new book, Making Contact, this is all about preparing for the what's the title here? Say preparing for the new realities of extraterrestrial existence. And that actually has a lot to do with the ancient world because there are so many examples and let's say pieces of evidence that will show and showcase that the ancients absolutely had contact with beings from other dimensions, realities, planets, etc. So we're going to get into that today. Alan's also got some amazing knowledge with remote viewing. He actually teaches this. And I am a big believer that the ancients were tapping into these psychic abilities for many thousands of years before we rediscovered them recently with the military and whatnot. So we're going to get into that, and then we'll talk about as well all the cool stuff that Alan's got coming up this year for you guys to check out. So, Alan, the first thing I wanted to start though with is I'm curious. We actually haven't talked about this at all. Is like your backstory. I think everyone that gets into this niche of alternative anything, alternative history, alternative views on science, reality, etc. There's always a story. There's always a reasoning, a catalyst in a sense that puts us into this direction of truth seeking. So for you, what got you into this and what kind of led you down this rabbit hole?
Well, yeah, it's not even a rabbit hole anymore. It's a whole rabbit hole. It's a whole world. But I always felt different than the rest of my family. Even I've always had friends, but everybody wanted to be so normal, and I just wanted to be different. So I was fascinated by space. Astronauts were a big thing in the 60s, 70s. I wanted to be an astronaut. I mean, just as a 7-year-old, I loved Star Trek. I loved science fiction. There was something fascinating about things that weren't mundane meaning worldly of this world. So, and I couldn't understand why everyone else wasn't interested in that. Why would you watch baseball when you could watch about the mysteries of ancient Egypt? So I mean, I just was fascinated because if there's a mystery going on here, and there is, I mean, talk about ancient mysteries. These bodies, the DNA in our body is one of the oldest ancient mysteries. What was that modification that happened? Some people say 200,000 years, 400,000 years ago, that distinguished the evolving primates from the rest of the animal-like creatures on the planet. I say we are the extraterrestrials. Who we are as human beings is not totally from the Earth. Yes, of course, there's evolution and all that, but I think there was a modification by whoever that made us. We are really different. We have houses, we have clothes, we have decoration. I mean, there's not really any. Even the most intelligent animals, the dolphins and whales, they just live their life, but they don't make all these artifacts and things. They're just there's something strange and unusual about humans, and I don't know what that is, but that's part of the mystery. That's definitely part of the mystery. So that's my fascination. Yes.
And I love that. That immediately brings me into the questions of, well, you're not the only one who makes a note of our DNA and the weirdness in which we come onto this planet. And, we can look as far back as the ancient Sumerian, tablets to see when you look at the translations, you scratch your head and think it sounds like you're reading a science fiction book, much like you're mentioning, these TV shows like Star Trek and things like that we would only expect to find in science fiction, not reality. And yet, in a lot of these ancient texts, there are so many depictions and tales of other beings coming to this planet, doing genetic manipulations, all of this crazy stuff. Where have you kind of led yourself with your research, and what have you come across when it comes into terms of our creation, perhaps, or where we even come from?
Well, I do think on many levels, I'm thinking now. first of all, this mind, this is why I teach remote viewing, is non-local. The awareness of this greater mind, I call it the imaginal realms. It's not imaginary. There's a whole new terminology that people like Jeffrey Kripal are trying to put together, talk about this world of this intuitive cognition. That's one way of putting it. And this mind is non-local. So already we're not of this world. This is something strangely the CIA backed into by developing a remote viewing program at Stanford Research Institute. They discovered, not they, but as a classical Western organization, they discovered the infinite nature of human consciousness. Not that they were looking to do that, but I think that's what they discovered. When I interviewed Hal Puthoff, you know who Hal Puthoff is, right?
Is he the kind of like the grandfather of remote
Yeah,
viewing?
and Ingo Swann and Russell Targ
Right.
formatted or formulated the remote viewing program at Stanford Research Institute because the CIA wanted to keep up with the Russian spying program. They said, well, the Russians are psychically spying on us. What are we going to do about that? So they turned to Hal, and Hal turned to Ingo, who was a great psychic, and Russell Targ brought in some of the money and funding, and they, for 20 years, they developed a remote viewing program that's still in effect. And I got a direct lesson from Russell, one of the founders, but I was also interviewing Hal Puthoff, who's actually very deep right now in the disclosure world. He's quite a brilliant guy, but he was a scientist, and so was Russell Targ. He'd say, he'd go into that office every day thinking, this is impossible. How can anyone see beyond this ordinary reality? And every day he'd be shocked at the results, that there were people. I mean, I could give you a target. I could tell you, Chris, that a friend of mine is someplace, and if you really concentrated, you could see where they were, what they were doing, even what they were saying. I mean, it depends how much your skill is. So how does that happen? How is that even possible when all we think we are is this physical embodiment in this limited place in time space? So if this works, and over again in my classes, I'm shocked that, wow, this really works. Like I was doing a remote viewing just the other day in my class I'm teaching for LightNet. It's a Zinka Caro who runs this whole making contact organization. There's many different ways to make contact with people, like light language or channeling, but I'm holding the remote viewing part. So we're remote viewing Sedona. I'm not telling them. And I say, okay, what is the target? And I would say 3/4 of the class said, well, I'm outdoors. It's reddish. I taste this kind of iron taste in my mouth. It's big, wide open spaces. And, you know, they got the target. I mean, it's not about naming, because it's about using your right brain to access infinite realities, because that's the part. It's like the internet that's connected to all time, all space. So I'm amazed when people get the target so exactly, and no one's told us how that's possible, and not even scientists, no one even studying remote viewing knows how this is possible. So I'm trying to formulate my own intellectual understanding, which talks about cognitive intuition, like using your mind for cognition that's beyond time and space. That's sort of the only way to describe it. You could say it's right brain. But anyway, if we have access to infinite knowledge, then we can remote view the past. We can remote view the future. We can know what about all those ancient mysteries on Earth. There are remote viewers that do that. So, so what was your question again?
Well, okay, I got now. You gave me like 5 more questions, Alan. This is great. So my my first question, I guess, is, you know, with this whole rediscovery of remote viewing, and remote viewing, for those listening and watching, like Alan's saying, it's non-local, meaning it literally can transcend this dimension of the third dimension and goes to higher dimensions, which don't necessarily have time. At linear time, as we know, it doesn't really exist in these higher dimensions. And so you can look backwards in time and also forwards in time and do readings like that. Now, my first question, because I have two, the second question would be, how did the ancients tap into this with when we're talking about contact? I want to talk about that in a second, because there are really amazing ways that we can have contact with extraterrestrials in ways that I think the typical person might not recognize. So I want to get into that. But with the ancients and their way of remote viewing, what was like, if when you've done it yourself, have you had any experiences where you've remote viewed into the ancient past and seen anything of interest?
Well, that's a really good question. I think the ancients did it. You know, all those cave drawings that
Yep.
they have found in Spain and France. Well, I think what the ancients did was draw these animals and they focused on them and they were able to get a location of how to hunt. So we have
Ah,
we have our minds is as great as our ancient ancestors going back a million years. There was been no development, I think, in the capacity of human brain. I mean, they're probably even more advanced than we were because they were tuning in to the flow of nature. And we've been so dumbed down and put a limit on what we know. I mean, right now, birds and elephants, if there's an earthquake happening somewhere, they'll know about it and they will leave that area. I mean, we have that capacity, but we've shut off that way of knowing and we have to reignite that. So I would say the ancients lived in more of a magical world where they realized they weren't so focused on intellect. They were much more in touch with their intuition. And if they were hunting, not saying that's a great thing to do, but if they were hunting an animal, they knew how to find them because they resonated with that animal, and that animal wasn't in a way separate from them. So that capacity is great. As far as like ancient civilizations, ancient places, well, on the have you been to the pyramids, right?
yeah, in Egypt, yes. Yeah.
In Egypt, right? And there are pyramids all over the planet. They don't know how to duplicate the structure of the Great Pyramid. They don't know how they fit. You know, when you're going through those tunnels and you open up into the Grand Gallery and then you go into the King's Chamber and there's these 50-foot long granite blocks on the ceiling of the King's Chamber that would be impossible to fit in. I mean, that's the great mystery here. How are they creating these structures beyond our understanding? I mean, what did they know? What did they know about the true measurement of the earth, about sacred geometry, about just the phi ratio, the phi ratio of the coordinates, and how did the sun and the moon, the earth, I just read Robert Lawler's book. You know Robert Lawler?
No, I'm not familiar.
Robert Lawler created the term sacred geometry,
Oh.
and he wrote a book called the End of Time. What is it called? The Fractal at the End of Time. Anyway, he
Mm.
looked at a lot of ancient civilizations and their measurements and said that they knew the distance from the Earth to the sun to the moon. There was these mysteries were known, and temples. The word temple means reflection, template. And so the temples were a reflection of the stars. So these ancients built temples to reflect the stars because they knew as below, so above, as above, so below. If they could build these reflection of stargates, maybe they can create portals through time space based on what the stars were. I
That's
mean,
what,
some people.
Ellen, that's what I swear to God, I've been thinking that for a while with these temples. Why are they aligned to these astronomical alignments? And why do they have to have very big significance with the equinoxes and the solstices? Is it like they're harnessing the earth energy, combining it with cosmic energy that we've lost? I won't say we don't know. We've lost that information because it seems like the ancients were always building over aquifers in specific places with specific alignments. You don't do that for fun. And I'm sorry, but you don't do that just purely for religious spiritual reasons, it's way too much work on a engineering construction level. There's got to be more of a practical purpose. So you're one of the first people I've heard to say the Stargate connection with that. I'm really that's really cool.
Well, you saw Graham Hancock's latest series on Netflix, didn't
Oh
you?
yeah, Ancient Apocalypse. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great. He alluded to these ancient structures as pointing to different parts of the sky, but he doesn't get into what I think are the stargates. So when you align the structures, it's just my theory, when you align the structures on Earth to reflect the stars, I think there are certain stargates in the heavens that when you line it up here, you duplicate the energetics of that, and these stargates are accessible at that point.
Well, you just give me an idea here, Alan. Like, what if through quantum entanglement, right? We have quantum entanglement. What if these sites were built perhaps with the influence or by beings from those constellations? So they have perhaps there's an element in the rock or these temples that is quantum entangled with something back at that original source somewhere in that galaxy, and maybe that's how they're connected. And you were talking about an ancient cosmic highway system.
Yeah, I think there's something too. I think the entanglement happens when you duplicate the resonance of what you're seeing in the sky, and there's a resonance with the stones on the earth and Stonehenge and all the great pyramids, and everything was trying to harness a resonance frequency with the heavens. Why are the Mayan calendars more exact than our calendars today?
Yeah.
What did they know about this alignment that I think the high civilizations of Mayans disappeared? I think they went and what is it, 793 AD, when all of a sudden they left their cities. Of course, there's Mayans still there, but I think there's part of those high priests that, and of course that thing in Palenque with the guy flying the spaceship and all that, that.
Oh, that's right. The rock carving on one of the
Yeah. So
delays or whatever. Yeah.
there's a lot that these ancients knew about aligning. Actually, do you ever been to Teotihuacan in Mexico?
Have not yet, but really want to.
That's probably one of the most amazing pyramids I've ever seen. But I don't know if you'll believe this, but there's an avenue called the Avenue of the Dead because they found all these dead bodies there. But when I went to a Carlos Castaneda workshop, do you know Carlos Castaneda?
No.
Never heard the name Carlos Castaneda?
No, what's he doing?
Gotta read that. He is the premier. He opened up peyote and all that
Okay.
sacred wisdom to the rest of the world. I mean, there were these little peyote cults, but anyway, he went beyond peyote and realized that these were really ancient seers in Mexico. And his teacher, Don Juan, said that, according to one of his colleagues, that the Avenue of the Dead was when people would stand in these little temple niches and they'd stare at the top of the pyramid for like a week at a time or maybe more, and they'd fast and they'd just focus on the top, and then the shaman would come up the road, climb to the top of the pyramid and say now, and everyone would just disappear.
Wow.
That's
or something. Yeah.
I don't have proof of that, but yes.
Wow. That's really interesting. I mean, you got to wonder, right, with some of these these are ancient breakaway civilizations perhaps, and I've definitely heard those stories. Now, where did they disappear to, these Mayans? Could they have I know there's the ancient alien theory, of course, of going up into a spacecraft or going off planet, or did they go into the planet in the inner Earth, or is it just impossible to know?
No, or the other option is they actually dimensionally shifted.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, good call.
So they flip their body. This is what ascension is. There's a lot of talk about ascension. Nobody really. I say when you can activate the biophotonic elements within the cellular structure and turn your body into light, you've ascended the body. This is what the rainbow body is. This is what supposedly Jesus did. The Shroud of Turin is a snapshot of the body turning into light. There's so many traditions. William Henry talks about this all the time.
Yeah.
If you know work. And that's our divine potential.
Mm.
And this is what the ancients were after, with the right alignment, the right energetics, the right temple structures. They were after transmuting the body into light. And this is what I think these beings, and the beings that, getting back to the Avenue of the Dead, they found dead bodies there for the people who weren't able to transmute their body. They would just drop to the ground. That's what they found. But
Wow.
you know, the whole Wounded Knee massacre happened because the Lakota were doing the ghost dance, which transmuted them into this other dimension, and they were shot before they could finish that process. There's a whole story
Oh,
of
okay.
ghost dancing. And have you been out to the Pine Ridge? And
No.
they're holders of wisdom too. I was out there with Whitley Strieber once, and
Oh, wow.
Whitley says to me, "Don't you see this whole other world around us?" He went through that dimension, Whitley. So it's very strange. So there's overlays right now. There are interdimensional highways that contain beings of all sorts of levels of consciousness that we're not aware of. So the ancient mystery schools, you know about the ancient mystery
Of
schools?
course, yeah. And that bleeds into ancient Greece, and that probably
Right,
started in
ancient
ancient Egypt,
Greece,
perhaps.
Egypt. I think it really started in Egypt.
Yeah.
That was all about the transmutation of physical reality into higher dimensional reality. That was the job of the initiate, was to bridge those realms. And I think a lot of the temples in Egypt were actually set up as ancient sites of initiation. Of course, the modern day Egyptians have lost that understanding, and most tourists have lost that understanding, but they are still there to be activated, because that's why they were built in stone, to hold the resonance frequencies for all ages.
Right.
And
To
that
to last.
to last as frequency energizers, as batteries of potentials to transmute consciousness. This is why they're still there, because there's a whole nother generation of would-be ancient initiates or ancient from the past that are now journeying to these ancient mysteries unearthed and learning their true secrets.
That's it's really interesting as well, because what you're saying there is, at least for me, I'm making some ties and connections to what were these temples built out of. And sure, there's stone. Yes, stone is great because it lasts so long, and yes, there's resonant qualities to certain stones. But to get more specific, I did an episode recently on this, which was why these certain stones, because there's a lot of types of granite and basalt and things that are used to build these temples and pyramids all around the world. A lot of the granite that's used has quartz crystal in it, which we know with crystal, quartz, silicone, that's all computer technology that stores data, and it also stores and can create electricity through piezoelectric actions with pressure on crystal. Then we've got electric properties with some basalt, or sometimes insulative properties with limestone. And so I start to look at these ancient stone structures as electronic slash energy devices of unknown imaginable powers. They're probably multi-purpose. There's probably so much more going on. Do you think that the quality of the stones might have to do with that, as well as the alignment and everything else we've been talking about?
Yeah, especially like the Great Pyramid had white limestone on the outside that is now actually and there was ancient writing supposedly in that line. Have you heard that?
In the
Within the
limestone? No, I haven't heard that. No.
imprint of these, supposedly, I don't know, but there were like an alien language written in the limestone. And I think if you go to the Mosque of Ali in Cairo, they used those stones, those alabaster stones, to build that mosque, and you could still see some of that writing in that mosque. At least that's what I thought I saw when I went to the Mosque of Ali there. So
Wow.
um what was the question?
Well, it was more. It's all good. No, I mean we're going all over the place here, but
Yeah.
it's fantastic. I was just talking about the quality of the stones,
Oh
and
yeah, the quality of the stone. So limestone, these stones they hold metals, they hold composition, and there are certain balance. I mean, they say there were these light bulbs in the Temple of Dendora. There's these light bulbs that illuminate because there's no torch marks in these old temples. I mean, how do you go that deep into the pyramid and not have any light and have any idea what you're doing? Obviously, there was a source of illumination 5,000 or 10,000 years ago that we have no idea about. So we have to understand that the technology is in the stones. Yes, you could rub two quartz crystals together and get sparks, but what if you did something and had some emulsifiers and illuminated the stone, illuminated the quartz? I mean, it's not that unbelievable. We think we're so technologically advanced that we have all the answers here, and that anything that's gone before could not have been more sophisticated than what we have. But Egypt lasted for at least 5,000 years, probably they're as old as 10,000 years, continuous civilization. And so the mysteries of Egypt, at least, and you go to Göbekli Tepe. Have you been there? Göbekli Tepe?
not yet, but it's high up on the list.
Well, my theory of Göbekli Tepe is that how they carve these animals that stand out from the stone, and
Yeah,
they also do this in Petra. I think they were using an old form, even in the Great Pyramid. I looked at the Great Pyramid. How do they move those blocks into place? Well, I think they use an old form of cement from the sand that was all around them, and even in Göbekli Tepe, they would create molds, maybe out of clay, maybe out of papyrus, and then they pour sand in these molds, and there would be an emulsifier that hardened the sand into the rock, and the holder of that, whether it was papyrus, would dissolve. It would just kind of dissolve, and I think that might be how the Bosnian pyramid was created, how maybe some of the great structures in Egypt and Göbekli Tepe. Because if you're in Göbekli Tepe and you're carving this column and you want this thing to stand out on the column, you have to carve away the whole column for this little animal. But what if you poured a mold of sand and emulsified it and hardened with a little mold of this animal inside there? I think it would be much easier. I don't know anyone who actually backs up that story, but I think it's obvious there was some kind of building technology that we've lost. And I think that's the secrets of the Masons. Like, what were the Masons really building? How were they actually creating these structures? And that's why I think there's all this Masonic secrecy, not because there are any kind of weird rituals, because they were holding the secrets of architecture. And architecture is the foundation for civilization. Even in our modern world, it's the architecture that creates the empire, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Rome, Greece, New York City, they all are so proud of their empires of stone. So
and they all have Egyptian obelisks.
Yes, they definitely all have Egyptian obelisks, and the obelisks are also points of transmission. Did you ever study Dan Winter's work? Do you know Dan?
No.
He is one of the true geniuses of our time, Dan Winter. He talks about these resonant frequencies of standing pillars, and there's implosion factors, and just all through stone technology. So there's secrets of the stones, and different stones, and gold and silver and bronze. I mean, that's all comes from gold. Ore is buried in the stone. You just make a fire hot enough, the gold starts to melt out. You collect the stone. I mean, metallurgy is one of the oldest sciences on the planet, and it was such a valuable science that we create tools by melting the stone. I mean, if we could really relearn from the ground up, like a master class in how these ancients developed their technology, from stone tools to temple building to, I think that would change our world and open us up to the gifts of the human potential, because I think we still have that technology inside of us somewhere.
Well, that's a perfect segue to I feel like what the hell is our junk DNA? Like, what's that doing? You know, there's this DNA that's supposedly not that's just off. In it. Is that our potential? Maybe that's
I don't
untapped.
even pay attention to that kind of nonsense that, scientists think they're authorities because they have the answers to something, but a scientist will never say, or at least the one in mainstream, I don't know what that is. They'll always tell you what they think it is based on
Yeah.
their guess. That was my big argument with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Do you ever see his master class? He says, someone will tell you a little bit of knowledge and think they have all the knowledge, but someone who doesn't have any knowledge thinks they have. Anyway, it's just nonsense. Why
Yeah.
do you wouldn't even pay attention to that kind of language? Nature doesn't make junk. Everything that falls in the forest is not junk. It's used by the earth. I don't think, I mean, the whole idea also about, it's a whole other subject, but dark matter, dark energy, those are fudge factors for things they can't explain. I said to one scientist who was really, confident in his knowledge, I say, don't you think maybe there's no missing matter, no dark matter? Don't you think you're misunderstanding the weight of black holes? Don't you think that's where all the extra energy? And he goes, no, we've looked into that. We know how much black holes are. They don't know anything. Of course, they know something. They know build your computer, make an airplane, drive a car. But, it's like, I think, who was it? Max Planck says, scientists moves forward one funeral at a time. And the
Yeah.
book that really talks about this best is Thomas Kuhn, Theories of Scientific Revolution. He says, what is an anomaly in one scientific paradigm, he also coined the word paradigm, is the thing that moves the paradigm forward. So right now we're dealing with the anomaly of what are these things in the sky, but it doesn't fit into their accepted knowing, the mainstream. So they ignore it, they write it off or make excuses like, deGrasse Tyson again said, oh, there must be an artifact on the radar. He ignored the idea that, or the actuality that these pilots saw these craft. I'm talking about the Nimitz sightings. And he said, oh, it must be an artifact on the radar. But you see, people are really identified with their belief system, with whatever, even their baseball team. You can't insult their baseball team because they are so identified with the external and they're identified with their beliefs. So you can't come to a scientist and say, how do you know that? And they say, well, we just know it, and like I said, science has done a lot of good, a lot of, it's made life more comfortable, science, technology, but what they don't know, they have to admit. And that's why I'm pushing for UFO disclosure, because nobody knows. I know I'm jumping around a little, but no one knows what's really out there. They don't know where they're from. They don't know how their technology works. And the government, Canadian too, is keeping these secrets until they think they know something, but they'll never know it until they understand reality differently. They're not going to know it with their left brain. They're going to need their whole body, their intuition, to understand the technology, because the technology has to do with consciousness itself.
That's really, really interesting, Alan, because that's really what we're kind of coming up against right now when we're trying to have contact with these beings, right? And we're realizing that to have contact, you can't get around the idea of consciousness. And I'm not just saying consciousness as I'm awake. I mean consciousness as this non-local idea of our awareness and who we are. Our being is non-physical, right? And so embracing that, of course, that's a huge paradigm shift for a lot of people already as it is, but then to embrace that allows us to potentially have contact with these other beings, whether they're from physical other worlds or from other dimensions. As you've been saying, that's kind of where where we're headed. And I'd love to hear from you, what have you experienced or, know about when it comes to contact with extraterrestrials, and how any normal human being can facilitate that for themselves.
Can we just take a break for 1 second? I just have to pee for 1 second.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, no problem.
Well, I'm not saying I know anything. All I'm saying is I've researched this, I thought about it, and I've gone beyond the mainstream understanding. Like, even in Egypt, even studying, there's the mainstream saying, oh, it's not more than 5,000 years old. And then there's the alternative, like John West says, why is it that when the further you go back in Egypt, the more sophisticated the monuments are? How do you explain that? So there's alternative history that's not really alternative. I think it's the true history that people, they want to put us in this little box. So, of course, there's no aliens there because we haven't seen them. And yet, if you look at the archives of MUFON, or if you read Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, you know that Robert Bigelow amassed a data bank of like 5,000 sightings from around the world. And we're only getting reports of 150 or 400 in the latest, but there's huge data banks of sightings of pilots, but also regular people. And it's being discounted because it's like the church with Galileo. It's like, no, you can't say that the earth is not the center of creation. It's like there has to be an official sanctification from those in control. It's what Timothy Leary used to say about LSD. It was outlawed. LSD was outlawed not because it was harmful. Maybe, I don't think you want to do too much, but because it made people think differently than the mainstream. So we're not allowed to think differently than these confines. But now with the internet, there's so much possibility to create alternative worldviews, and we're doing it. I mean, of course, there's some people that I don't agree with making up their own ideas. But as far as contact, it goes back to what you were saying, consciousness. And when you say conjure, or you or anyone, we think of this awareness. I mean, it had, new words that come into our culture take many years to really solidify the definition. So people mean this by people mean awareness, people mean intelligence, but we don't really have a solid definition of consciousness. I can take it to mean the perception of awareness, if you want to call it that, but that is not a thing. It's an application. Consciousness is not an application. So when I've interviewed Deepak Chopra, the conversations always come down to, oh, it's all consciousness. Oh, it's this. It's everything's made of consciousness. Where consciousness is not in us, we're in consciousness. And it's like, I say, that's great, Deepak. That's spirituality 101. But how do you apply consciousness? What is the application? So you can apply it sending and receiving thoughts, sending you a thought and receiving telepathy. And if consciousness is really the ground of all being, as people like Joe Dispenza and Amit Goswami and quantum physicists are saying, I'm not saying that's right, but it seems to make sense that consciousness is a way of replacing the old word for God. If consciousness is the thing that is throughout time and space, and we have access to it, we're a fractal of it, then how do we use the application of consciousness to send thoughts, to receive thoughts, to go beyond space and time, to remote view? So there's a way of applying consciousness. It's what they teach in abundance classes. You apply consciousness. If you want money or you want something, you resonate as if you've already had it. That's an application. If you want it, you never get it because you're always creating wanting. But if you feel as if you have it and own the having, the resonance frequency of having within the collective field, within the quantum field, as Joe Dispenza says, brings it to you. That's another application of consciousness with intention. So this idea of intention and this vehicle of consciousness, and I think the closest that people have gone to it is the Hindus. They really went, instead of developing an external science, they developed an internal science where they labeled different states of consciousness, samadhi and mahasamadhi and this, and they understood it in that way. So what is the application of consciousness? Well, if I want to make contact with an ET, I send them a thought. I mean, I have to specify. If I want to make contact with you, I have to know your telephone number or your Zoom number. So if you want to make, you can put it out there, but it's best to let something come. First of all, this vehicle, this brain is the hardware for the application of consciousness, but it's hardware. So you have to know how to use the hardware. So one way to use it and become connected to these beings is to make yourself available. So get out of the way, get the personality out of the way. It's like, again, do you know Joe Dispenza's work?
Yeah, definitely. And I see that he's been on your YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, I know Joe for 20 years. We both started at the Ramtha School together in Washington State. I mean, he was
amazing,
the star student about 30, before he ever started to go public, he was teaching at the Ramtha School. But we both picked up a lot of the language from Ramtha, who was pure consciousness. You know who Ramtha was? He was a 30, if you believe the story, he was a 35,000-year-old warrior from Atlantis who was channeled through this woman with incredible knowledge. I mean, something, J.Z. Knight, who was channeling around, was tapped into something. Anyway, he talked a lot about the quantum field. So it's all in the quantum field, meaning the potential for everything you want, everything you may ever imagine. It's out in the unformed. And so how do you make it manifest? By directing your focus on something. So if you want to make contact with an extraterrestrial, you just don't throw it out and say, I want to make contact. First of all, you want to make contact with higher levels of beings on any dimension. So you want to do a little background. You want to tap into your feelings, but then, and you want to set your intention. And this is what I teach in my remote viewing classes. Like, because the classes are not about remote viewing Russian underground bases. That's what the CIA was doing. It's about remote viewing other planets and other civilizations, because the universe, or this multiverse, is full of life. This is my feeling. Life is an emergent property of creation itself. It emerges. There's no reason behind it emerging. There's no scientific logic. It emerges. It just appears, because that's the potential of creation, is to manifest life, and out of life to manifest intelligent life. That's the emergent property of life itself. And so it's the reverse of Newton's laws of entropy. We're saying systems wind down. Those are closed systems. If you have a closed system, eventually it will collapse. But if you have an open system, like I think this universe is, it's being fed by an unknown source, and that builds towards complexity. So like life itself started with simple cells, and this is what Newtonian science can never explain. Well, how could it build towards complexity if there's only entropy? The best they could come up with is negative entropy, which is a really backwards way of saying life builds towards complexity, and intelligence builds towards complexity. So more and more sophisticated systems. So we have this facility, we set the intention, and then we also have to be able to receive, to know what receiving is. Like if I'm sending you a thought, you sit back and you think, okay, I'm going to make myself empty. So you have to get rid of your, so what Joe Dispenza said, you get rid of your history, you get rid of your name, your identification, everything you think you know, and you become available to the quantum field, and you ask to receive. And then when you receive, you might not even recognize what you receive because you don't know what you're even receiving. I
Right.
say, what's the difference between cognition and recognition, right? You know the difference? Do you know the
No,
difference?
please enlighten
Well,
me.
recognition means to recognize, to recognize. But you have to have cognized something in the first place. So if you're getting a download signal from some ET out there, you're not going to recognize it because you've never cognized it in the first place. So how do you cognize a reality that you have yet to perceive is the key to making contact. So you're going to get impressions and inklings and words or visions, and you have to be available to the unknown. Most people fear the unknown because they're projecting their known onto the unknown. The unknown is full of possibilities and infinite knowledge. If you sit back and start to have different types of thoughts, if the modality of thinking starts to shift in your internal reality, you're starting to make contact. They don't think like us. That's the big thing in my understanding. So people say you're getting messages from the Pleiades or they're getting messages, whatever, but maybe, but the frequencies of thought, like me and you, we're pretty human, we understand each other. But if one of us was alien, the whole frequency of our thought form reality would be at a different wavelength that we have to adjust who we are to pick up the understanding of what that's coming from. Like you're not going to get Wi-Fi on your AM radio, but you have to
Right.
amplify, or else you wouldn't even know it existed Wi-Fi on AM radio. It's like, so you need to fine tune the receiver, which you do by internally letting go everything you know and making yourself available to the unknown. By fine tuning the receiver, you're able to pick up different frequencies of thought form realities that don't look anything like anything you've known. It is like,
Wow.
and how do we know something we don't know? We make ourselves available and say, that's a strange thought, and not to reject it. Don't be freaked out, be detached, but it's the modality of thought. This is my theory anyway. I haven't really heard anyone say that. That is the language of exchange with ETs, the type of modality, like the frequency of exchange.
I've heard that's really interesting, Alan. Thanks for sharing all that because, I've heard from some insiders, people that have had experiences with extraterrestrials that they share that you're absolutely right. First of all, of course, these beings are very, very different than us. One of the main things that they do report are an incredible sense of unconditional love. That like the love you receive from a dog times 1,000. Such a and it's a frequency. It's a feeling that can bring someone to tears immediately. It's just so beautiful to be in the presence of some of these beings. And I've also heard that, Dr. Stephen Greer and his Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, the whole contact, the CE5 contact protocols that are through meditation practice. I'm sure you're fully aware of all that stuff. And whether or not there's things to it. What I think is interesting though is that part of the contact protocol is to get your frequency at a love frequency, to get your heart, and to put, instead of all this importance we always put into our left brain and our intellect, our logical side, and our brain. It's actually, sometimes it's important, but it's also the thing that can get in the way a lot, is our logical mind, our brain. And what we need to open up into is the heart. And when we're communicating, to use the heart, because our emotions are actually very powerful when we're using things like telepathy, from what I've heard, because telepathy is a very multifaceted form of communication. You're not just saying, I want to go to Mars. You're feeling that sentiment just as much as you're receiving the information, right? So it's very much, from what I've heard, it's a very multi-dimensional, literally, experience where your emotions and how you're projecting those emotions are just as important. So if you're in a really bad mood and maybe you're feeling aggressive or angry that day, you're probably not going to get contact, perhaps, because the beings that are potentially going to connect with you are receiving from you a frequency of anger and agitation. not something that they really want to get into. But if it's this unconditional love, they feel safer. They feel more inclined to interact with you. Have you heard things like that before? Oh, I think you're on mute here.
All right, I'm muted.
Yeah.
Of course, because love is a good frequency, but I think love is one level. And like you said, the dog, I think that's as high as a dog can get as far as love, which is great. They're very loving beings. You get a good dog, but humans can get to that frequency of love, but we can also get to these higher frequency. I mean, love is a baseline, of course.
Yeah.
But that's the starting point for human civilization, that love, and that's the medium of exchange throughout the cosmos. But there's other frequencies that we are not sensitized to that I think these ETs are trying to communicate with us on those levels, and we have to rise to the occasion. We have to realize that we can, like, no, there are no beings greater than us. They just have more development of their mental acuity. So we have to learn to discern the nature of thought itself, the nature of frequency. We can tune into frequencies. And I think understanding that we're energy, and all the Reiki and all the energy healing is another way. But there are frequencies that we're not prepared for, or we have yet to be prepared for. And when something new comes on, at least in my experience, we tend to like reject it. It's like, no, that's impossible. Or even when I first heard about ETs or something, I just like didn't accept it until I kind of had my own experience. So we have to be available for the unknown, the impossible, the unlikely. We have to train ourselves for what Ramtha used to say, and this was my favorite line of Ramtha: making known the unknown.
I love that.
That means we have to be available for something beyond our immediate perception. And how do we do that is by, like I said, letting go everything we know and becoming available for everything we don't know. And this is what's also the problems with ancient archaeology. They're trying to fit it into a box that we know. Oh, they built these buildings for this reason and that reason. We don't understand even how the ancient Egyptians thought. If we did, we'd understand how monuments were made. But we can tune into that frequency of thought, but we're so full up with this digital reality that's like overridden the ancient archaeological resources inside our own frequency capacity. And so I'm saying we have archaeological, this is a little far out, but frequencies in our brains that will help us understand what these ancient civilizations were about. But our modality of thought has been so amplified by the digital environment that we even forgot how to make a fire in the woods. That was a whole, or how to live off the land, or those were frequencies of thought. Those are anthropological value to how we got here today. So if we want to really study ancient civilizations, we really have to understand the thinking of those ancient civilizations. Why did the Egyptians bury the dead and do all that? What were they thinking? We don't really understand. All we understand is from our perspective, but I think there's a lot more mystery to the ancient Egyptians than this book. Oh, you can't. Oh, the Dreaming of the Moon of the Mind. Do you see that?
Yeah, that's wicked.
This is a book about a woman who read hieroglyphics, understood hieroglyphics. She studied hieroglyphics, and she said the Egyptians were not worshiping animals. They were much smarter than that. They knew these animals were archetypal energies that represented ways of perception for the human mind, and they used them as symbols for other ways of knowing. Wow. And so this is a whole new re-understanding of what the ancients really knew. They weren't primitive people. Look, how did they make these temples? We don't know. And so we have to excavate the archaeology of ancient thought if we're really going to understand the past and our future.
I just love that, Alan, because it's so true. It's all about perspective. And before I had my kind of awakening into our distant past, I looked at history just like everyone else. Honestly, I was not very interested in it. Found it very boring in school, and it just seems so almost so underwhelming that I just had no interest in pursuing it, because to me there was nothing resonating about our history. And it's all about the perspective. If you look back in time and look at it from the perspective that most of us are taught and literally conditioned from day one, which is we were more primitive, end of story. The further back in time you go, automatically means we knew less. And that alone, just that one perspective, changes everything. And I would love to get kind of like some of your final thoughts here on this before we wrap things up and talk a little bit about your book before we end this. Is why, like, where does it all start with us? From your perspective, I'd love to hear, like, were we created by other beings? Why is it that 250,000 or 400,000 years ago, we went from something else that we still have no link towards to the anatomically correct human that we are today, that has all this knowledge, that has all this intelligence? How in the hell did that happen? Like, what are your thoughts on our origins?
That's a great question. Of course, it's one of the oldest questions, but I do think there's panspermia. I think life, Gary Nolan says DNA is older than the earth itself. DNA is 9 billion years old. The earth is only 4.5 billion. So I think, like I said, DNA is a part of the fabric of time. So I think if we're consciousness, and consciousness is non-local, we created these bodies. We, as the creator gods, if you want to get out there like that, created the vehicle for the human expression to love, create, speak, do all the things we're doing here. And we did it to embrace creation as embodiments of the infinite mind. So the infinite mind individualized itself into me and you and all that, so we could play in the field of manifestation. So we are the creator gods, limiting ourselves in these human forms to have the adventure of experience. So we're here to have experience. That's really, and with each experience, you own a piece of the manifested world, a piece of creation. When you own it all, that means you understood the miracles of creation, understood on some level where you become it. That is the key to the ascended frequency. You start to raise your frequency because you become creation itself. And so we're here not by any design of ETs, but because the soul of the human, of soul spirit, wanted to manifest in physical form, to play in this level of creation of 3D realms. And then there's other levels we've manifested to play in, and maybe all time and space we're existing and playing in all those realms. So we came here for the great adventure of 3D incarnational reality. Some of us came here to solve the mysteries of the past, some to solve the mysteries of the future, some to see just the remarkable span of emotion and feeling and interaction we can have with each other. But it all comes down to this playground of feeling and emotion and experience. We came here to have fun, in other words. And we are the gods that sent us. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ETs. We're just as evolved as any of these beings out there. We just forgot how to use our hardware. But we can teleport this body beyond space and time. I mean, there's people who've done that. They've done it because they've gone inward. The great saints of the world. There were beings who could levitate, the beings who could teleport. That's not just mythology. Those are realities that are turned into myth because they're too hard to believe. So we have to stop being dumbed down by our cultures. Like you were bored with history until you realize, wow, maybe they don't know all the answers. Maybe there's really something more. And that's true in every field. It's like the guy who discovered continental drifts, like he was laughed at. He said, don't you think Africa and South America looked like they fit together? Everyone said, you are crazy. That is just a coincidence. Or the guy who invented that the heart was a pump that circulated blood. Everyone said, no, that is ridiculous. No, that was in the 1600s. So people are always laughed at when they see a greater truth. It's like the UFO thing. I mean, people are still laughing at the fact that there might be, that there are beings visiting this planet from somewhere else. He said, oh, that woman at the last press conference last week said, oh, yeah, I think there might be ETs out there, but I don't think they're coming to us in a balloon or whatever it was, something ridiculous.
Yeah.
So people love to tell other people what to think. That's why I'm not telling you what to think. I'm saying, open your mind to the impossible. And then maybe for all of us, a little glimpse of a new reality will drop in. New Realities is the name of my show. And that's what I'm in pursuit of. What is a new reality? It's a new way to think about the world as it is. And there's so many great people coming forward. I think Bruce Lipton, Nassim Harmeem. Have you interviewed Nassim? He's brilliant.
He is, yeah.
Who else? Even Anita Morjani, who's just had a near-death experience and sees it all as a continuum. I mean, so the body and the mind and consciousness, it's all part of the human vehicle, but what that really is, we've been yet to understand. So, I think the real excitement of the future is the fact that the science of spirit, the science of consciousness is coming into development. And when we can harness that without these mechanical technologies and realize the real access to the hardware that all of us are carrying around on top of our shoulders that we don't know how to operate because they weren't given a manual, but, or the manual was so brainwashed and conditioned and fit into a little box to dumb us all down. We have to reactivate the creative potential. It comes through creative thinking, creative questioning. Creativity is the human being, or the imagination is the human being, which is what William Blake said. It is the human being. You're not your personality. You're not your history. You're not your name. You're not whatever schooling or political party. You are the infinite mind realizing the potential of forever. That's who we are.
Wow. That's that's beautiful, Alan. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
I think this is what the ancients left as secrets in these stones. The fact that they pointed the way to some unknown mystery that they discovered, that they unearthed, these ancient mysteries, and they left it as a legacy. And that's why people are so interested in the past, because they know there's a secret to their own conscious mind and future in these stones. It's like a communication from ancient ancestors 5,000 or 10,000 years ago to today. It's like this time loop, and they're saying, it's here. It's here. Everything you want to know about the nature of reality is in these stones. And it's your job to find out what it is. So
Thank you for explaining why I'm so obsessed about this stuff, because sometimes I don't even know why I'm so obsessed about it.
yeah.
And I think there's a collective memory that we all share, some more than others probably. And we know this through epigenetics. They can store up to somewhere of like 50 generations of memory in our own DNA. First of all, there's also the conscious memory, which is in the Akashic records, and our own consciousness has that memory, which is why we have past life regressions, all that kind of stuff. So there's definitely a memory, and I think that's why certain people like yourself and me are just tantalized and so passionate about this, because we know there's so much more and we're just scratching at the surface. I feel like the human being is this, maybe let's say it's like an iPhone that you maybe at the most just learned how to turn on, but you don't know what any of the apps do. You don't even know how to connect it to the internet. You probably don't even know how to make a phone call on it yet. I mean, you're just looking at this on screen, and maybe you can tell the time, and that's about all you can do. It's like we're at that equivalent with our bodies and our minds and our souls, because they're this, I would think we're talking about ancient high technology, all this cool stuff, but in reality, what's the most high tech thing and piece of machinery we have is the human body, right?
And the brain, there's so many apps in the brain, applications of using consciousness that we have yet to discover. But you can only discover it really by going inward, by watching the dream time. The dream time is how the Aborigines, actually, they have the oldest continuous civilization, 60,000 years old of continuous civilization.
Wow.
And they did it by looking at the dream time. The dream time is their religion. And you know what the dream time is?
What's that?
You, I mean, so when you fall asleep, as you watch yourself fall asleep, and I try to do this practice almost every night, there's a place where the thoughts of the everyday world start to recede, and then you start to get glimpses of maybe faces or people, but there's like this stream of consciousness that takes over, that you're just witnessing. You're just witnessing it. And it's like, you ever realize a dream doesn't start anywhere? You're in the dream. It's
That's
not like
right.
once upon a time there was, no, it's like, and you know why that is? And I don't know if this is true, but it sounds good, because we're continuously dreaming, but your waking consciousness makes such a loud noise you hardly notice it. That's why.
Wow. So
I don't
okay,
know. But
so
so if you tap into the dream time where you watch yourself dreaming, and you're dreaming and you're the observer of the reality, of course, you get sucked into the dream and then you participate. But if you can stay back long enough where you observe the dream time, you start to control a different application, and you start to upgrade the operating system to realize that you can apply your consciousness in different ways. And so that's a key
wow.
that Origines told me. And I have yet to master that. But dreaming is a key to upgrading the applications of consciousness function.
I mean, I heard that's how Nikola Tesla got all of his inventions, was in that dream state. Hypnagogic state is that in between sleep and awake. I mean, Carl Jung talks about that. This is not, again, like super modern necessarily, right? We've known how to tap into this for a long time, but only certain groups of people, certain, secret societies, perhaps mystery schools teach this.
Well, Edison, Thomas Edison used to sleep with a weight in his hand.
I heard about that. All
If he
right.
wanted, he know he was in this hypnagogic state
Yeah.
where I'm, I get a lot of my ideas like when I'm falling asleep, and it's like I have to kind of, if I don't write it down, I know I'm going to forget it in the morning. So I have to force myself to write down. It gets me out of that state, but at least I got this
This,
really.
you get the idea.
But the dream time has been so overlooked, and it's the subtle application of consciousness. It's the receiving. And right now we're talking and we're giving, we're energizing. But when we sit back and receive, we're letting creation come into us. So it's like a two-way flow consciousness. It's a giving and receiving. It's a sending and receiving. So it's an application that we have forgotten how to use, because all the great answers to anything you want in the world lie in the receivership of consciousness. So if you have a problem, just lay back and just let it come to you without trying to work it out.
Yeah.
This is so that's part of the mysteries, who we are,
Mm.
the mysteries inside our human being, and it was manifested in stone. I think you might write like this last book of Robert Lawler, The Geometry of the End of Time.
Ooh,
And he was
cool.
he wrote he translated the big book, The Temple of Man. Have you seen that big blue?
Yes. Schwaller de Lubitz.
Robert de Lubitz. He learned Robert Lawler was living in India, at the French part of India. He was given this book and said by this French woman who said, translate this into English. He had to learn French in order to translate it. But Schwaller de Lubitz was such an amazing mystic. He looked at Egypt from a mystical point of view. And he said, one thing I remember just on page 5, do you have that copy of that double volume set?
No, just John West's version of that.
Oh, that was like,
Serpent in the Sky. Yeah.
I said this to John West once. I said, John, you read that whole book and one sentence had made your whole career. What's about the rest of the book, John?
Right. Right.
He just said, oh, Charlie Lubitz said there were water weatherings on the Sphinx. So it's like John took that sentence. But anyway, he wrote Serpent in the Sky. But in that book, Lubitz says like something like the river made the riverbank, right? Just like sound has made your ear or eye has made your light. We're responding to the environment with this equipment. So the universe has made our consciousness. It's a reflection of its own great mind. So we have the capacity, if we get beyond the personal mishigas, to know the infinite nature of creation, because we are the infinite nature of creation. I'm not saying I've got that far yet, but if we drop into the mystery, we realize we're part of the mystery, and that's sort of how we unearth the ancient mysteries on Earth.
I love how you're connecting my channel. You've done it like at least 7, 8 times in this recording,
I
Alan.
know,
That's
I know.
great. You're good.
Oh, because it's such an important phrase that we are unearthing as we kind of talk. What is the mystery really about?
Right.
What is, and I think it's about us. It's
Yeah.
definitely, we are part of that mystery.
It's all connected. It's all intrinsically connected, and this you're making me think, kind of like my final question to you before we wrap it up here is, I recently, a couple days ago, I did my first ever quantum hypnosis regression session. And for those listening, watching, who are like, what the hell's that? So Dolores Cannon, good God, 40 plus years ago, probably started this technique of hypnosis that she developed over the course of many, many decades. Long story short, it's one of the most incredible ways to get such a deep regression, not only into your own life, but into many of your past, present, future lives. And it's also like a direct connection to your higher self. Jung, of course, talks about that, these different levels of our consciousness. There's a part of us that isn't in our physical body, it's beyond our body, and it sees everything. It's not attached to our amnesia that we have in this lifetime, in a way. So in this process, what I discovered a couple of days ago was that what I was actually, when I was getting messages from my own higher self, it was coming through my imagination. And it really threw me for a loop, because we've been led to believe that our imagination is literally what they tell us, which is you're making up things out of thin air and it's coming out from nowhere. It's got no significance. It's like you're just making it up. And then you can choose to make it into a fun story or a movie or whatever. But as I was in this session, I realized, no, no, no. Is my, like, I don't know. This has been kind of threw me for a loop, and I'm still trying to figure this out. But is my imagination actually giving me information, not necessarily giving me nonsensical stuff? So I'm right now tripping out a bit on what is imagination. And as we're talking about all this stuff, I'd love to hear your thoughts on
Well,
that. What
that's been
is
my
that?
work in the last couple of years with remote viewing, because it seems like your imagination, but then when I say use your and then you actually get a target that's someplace else, that is not what they call imagination, fantasy, making up. That is why I said in the beginning of the conversation, we have to relabel it the imaginal realm. It's the imaginal. It's not imaginary. And I got this from a Sufi scholar who was translating the ancient Persian text and said, I can't call this imaginary. These people are going to real places. So what we've been called, and that's one of the unsophisticated labels of consciousness, is that your imagination is a vehicle of perception. It is that. And because no one talks about it like I do, we have a hard time accepting it. But that's exactly what your one level of your we have to come up with other words, because if I say imagination, you think you're making it up. But if I call it the imaginal cognition, then it's like, oh, there's an application for the imaginal cognition that connects me to other lifetimes, or gives me remote viewing targets, or helps me talk to ETs. And maybe I'm not making it up. Maybe I'm cognizing reality on this level of the imaginal. And this is a word I'm trying to bring back into usage, or not back, but into usage, because it hasn't been qualified. But as we study consciousness more and we work with the imagination, or what we call the imagination, in these other applications, we need to redefine our language, just like the Eskimos have like 20 words for snow, and it's us just snow. It's us, it's just the mind, imagination. No, we have to start to make distinctions. That's what they say in the landmark courses. Distinctions are great because they start, and they also get in the way sometimes, but when we make a distinction between imaginary and imaginal, we start to value the new definition as a cognitive function of the mind. And this is really what my next work is about: the cognitive function of the imaginal realm, and how we can recognize that we're cognizing these realms through another vehicle of thought. Does that make sense?
Yes, weirdly it does. I thank you so much for that, because like I said, I've been going through my own existential little roller coaster the last couple of days, just really trying to tap into what is this imagination. And I actually just realized, and I know we have so much programming already within us that does limit all these abilities we've been talking about in this episode. And even still, with that knowledge of my own awareness, knowing that there's so much limitation put on us, I still had yet another layer of that realized a couple of days back when I had to ask myself for the first time ever, well, what is imagination? And the way you just described that was kind of how I felt on Tuesday when I had this quantum hypnosis session. And I was conscious the whole time. So I thought, oh, when I get hypnotized, I'll kind of be out of it and then come to, and that's possible too for some people. But I was aware the whole time, yet a whole story was coming out of my mouth. And I had to really fight sometimes with my logical mind versus my right brain, and allow this quote unquote imagination to just keep coming. And it was telling it. The thing that really tripped me out was that I'm like, I know I have a really active imagination. So it told an incredible story from ancient Greece and all this cool stuff. And I just still had no idea what to make of it at the end, because of my own conditioning was screaming at me like, Chris, it's just your imagination, dude. You're making all this up. This is coming out of nowhere, dude. And coming from a guy who started a channel called Ancient Mysteries Unearthed, I'm still a victim to that programming, because it's tough for me to come to terms with that, right?
To recondition you here, and don't call it your imagination, call it imaginal cognition.
Imaginal cognition. All right.
That's exactly what we do when we tune into remote viewing, when we tune into past lives, when we connect with all these other realms. We're receiving it. When you use your imagination, that's an active application. When you're receiving these impressions from past lives or parallel realities, we're in receivership. And yeah, your imagination in the old way could create fantasies, but it can also receive something that's beyond the left brain's awareness. And, left brain always likes to be in control. It always likes to know exactly. So when I teach remote viewing, I say, this does not make sense to your left brain, and forget it even trying to make sense. And this is where, there's some really good psychics, but the psychics and they're getting from the same imaginal cognition, but the psychics that try to explain what they're seeing, that's where they go off. The ones that say to you, well, I'm seeing this going on and this going on, and it doesn't make any sense. Those are the ones that are closer to the truth, because they're seeing in the non-logical, super rational way. That's what I would call it. So this whole new field of study, this imaginal cognitive realm that I'm trying to institute in different technologies, inner technologies. And the masters already had this down, but no one's taught it in a everyday setting. That's what the ancient mystery schools are about. That's why me and Zinka Caro and a bunch of other people are bringing back the true nature of the human being as vehicles of perception. And, that's sort of what, when we go to Egypt, and the mystery in stone is a way of shifting perception. And if we can tune in on those other levels, we could discover what those ancients were really all about, what they were really trying to tell us with their hieroglyphics. And the tour guide we're going to pointed out all these Stargate images in these temples there. And so, like I said, there was a reflection of the stars. The Egyptians knew that their temples or templates were reflections of the heavens. I mean, this is what Baval said. The three great pyramids reflected the belt of Orion, but the Mayans did that too. The Mayans built as reflection of the stars, and even the Greeks built the temple. If you go to the Acropolis, it's set up in the cardinal directions, and there's mysteries, and this is what Graham Hancock was touching upon in Ancient Apocalypse, but I don't think he really understood all of it. He was quite brilliant, but he pointed it towards disaster, and I think they're also pointing towards the future.
Yeah, 100%, Alan. I mean, thank you so much for everything you've bestowed upon the audience today. I've got a lot to ponder over now, especially after this conversation. So first and foremost, thank you for everything. And before we let you go, I'd love to hear, as we kind of naturally segue into this trip of Egypt, where people can get in contact with you, and also this book that we've been seeing this entire time here in your background, Making Contact. So first of all, what's Making Contact all about? What's this book all about?
Making Contact is an anthology of people I really respect in the field, the best and brightest. So it's a collection of essays about levels of making contact. So I go from the government cover-ups with people like Nick Pope and working through disclosure, to Grant Cameron, a fellow Canadian, who talks about every time you see a UFO, you are entangled with that. You are part of the phenomenon. There are no innocent bystanders. You are accessing that realm. So he's brilliant. And I have talked to JJ and Desiree Hurtak. JJ Hurtak's one of the few people actually left the planet with his body. He went to these higher realms by chanting this ancient mantra. He's actually leading the trip to Egypt when we go. Then I have Whitley Strieber writing a chapter about his abductions and his reframing of the abduction and saying it's a bigger picture. I have an previously unpublished essay from John Mack. You know who John Mack was?
I've heard that name. Yeah. What was he doing again?
Definitely. He was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, head of the Harvard psychiatry department, started to talk to people having contact, and they had such intense experience, and they had experiences were so similar. He said, I don't think these people are making it up. I think something real is happening to them, and it's outside my framework. But he was convinced these abductions by aliens, if you want to call it that, were real. And he wrote this essay, and it was never published before he died about 20 years ago. But I asked his his family and his archivist if I could publish it for the first time, and they were really happy.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So that was a breakthrough. And then I have, you know who Darryl Anka is? He's a channel for Bashar. Darryl's had this 30-year relationship with this entity called Bashar's from the future. So he wrote a chapter in there. It's all about different avenues of making contact, how we make contact, what that looks like for each person on each level of awareness. I have my story in there of how I met these ETs on a deserted road. I know it's
Oh man,
in
that's awesome.
me and this girlfriend I had, we were driving through and we were felt like we were suspended in animation. I mean, as I say, it's hard to even believe that happened to me, but
I believe. I believe.
I believe it, but it happens in that other realm. The thing about when you go regress yourself to an alien abduction, it's that same realm. It's like, am I making this up? But it's coming from somewhere. So it's like, and she had the same experience. This girlfriend of mine had the same experience that I had in remembering, and we were separate that we remembered. So there's something about the ETs themselves that live in this imaginal realm, and it's not imaginary, but they're not of this world.
Yeah.
The ETs are in this world, but not of this world. They come in and out of this realm. So where are they? And this is why I go into the book. Well, they're everywhere. They're right here with me and you, Chris. They're everywhere, but we have yet to have the cognitive abilities. That's why I think cognition is such an important word. We have yet to have the cognitive awareness to recognize them in our reality. Those are the new realities when you can recognize these beings. And there's so many different types all around us right now. And we can only do that when we activate the full potential of our brain in order to perceive greater realities. So that is sort of what the book's about. How do we make contact? Well, we start to make contact with ourselves. We make contact with each other. We make contact with the ancient past, and we make contact with this infinite unknown that is knocking on our door every single moment. The infinite unknown is saying, wake up, there's more to know. The past is everything you've known. The future is everything you have yet to know. And that's why we're in this stream of consciousness. We're in this stream. Like right now, there's the stream. If you can just get out of the way from your personality, you could pick up the stream and know everything there is to know right now in time and space. And we're that infinite. This is what the capacity of this hardware is capable of achieving. But we've been so programmed and brainwashed and dumbed down and conditioned to fit into this little box. The reason your history was made so boring is because they didn't want you to ask questions about the past.
Exactly.
They were purposely dumbed down. We're going to make this as boring as possible, because if they knew that it wasn't boring, they might find out more, and we don't have the answers for that. So the best thing is to stay in the unknown, and making contact is making contact with the unknown. And that's why I go deep into this book, and I'm writing another book, which will be a sequel, which is sort of like beyond the known, beyond.
That's that's amazing, Alan. So yeah, everyone listening and watching, definitely check out Making Contact by
Alan
Get that
on Amazon. You got it in Barnes & Noble, I think even in Canada. You can go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/New Realities. Just watch New Realities. Here, September 6th to the 16th. Meet us in Cairo. Go to EgyptAscensionRetreat.com. Sign up. Do a 10-day fascinating tour to the great ancient sites of Egypt, starting in Cairo. And there's the price. And it's all here. If you register now, you get the whole itinerary. You get everything on the tour. And most of it, once you get there, most of the trip is paid for, as far as meals, hotel accommodations, and all the tours. Kings Valley, Temple of Hathor, Temple of Philae at Isis, some of the inner sanctuaries, of course, Karnak, Luxor. Oh, there's the Temple of Isis in Philae, which is really powerful. And the Great Pyramid, This
Of
is
course.
uh, if you're interested in unearthing the ancient mysteries, this is what I want to go on. But really, just visit me in Sedona. Go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/new realities. Email me at newrealities@earthlink.net and check out my book. And let's do more, Chris, because I really like your questions.
Well, thank you, Alan, so much for being here. This was so much fun. Yeah, again, we'll definitely have to do another recording sometime, especially about your newer work that we were just kind of getting into. So, thank you so much
I
for.
answered your question about the alien stuff because there's so many different types and groups, and
Yes.
our level of consciousness is so diverse. There's beings that are really hive-like. There's beings that are really like ascended masters. There's beings that just want to help us. There's beings that want only our DNA and genetics so they can evolve their race because they reach the end of their evolution because they just developed their mind. They forgot how to feel. Uh, there's beings that live in the earth. There's beings that slip in and out of dimension. But when it comes down to it, we're all basically the same. We all just want to have fun.
Yeah. Aliens like to have a beer sometimes and party with their fellow.
Here, but I mean, some of the aliens that some of the people talk about love to use their mind to time travel. And if you time travel, you shift the dimension. So, how many steps can you time travel by keeping dimensional timelines in place? And what happens if you shift this timeline? It shifts that timeline, it shifts the future
Yeah.
time. And there's a sort of mental, not even mental, consciousness games that they play. And they're probably playing that with us as well. So,
Yeah, I've even heard things like we are some of these extraterrestrials, but we're just from the future. It's us 3,000 years, 5,000 years in the future or something.
anything is possible. We
Anything,
are
right?
them, they are us. And when we get to the place of understanding the deeper applications of the brain, we realize that we're in all time, all space right now. But we have to access those applications, and it's like an escape room. You don't get one key until you uncover this key, and that leads you to another key. There's video games like that. You get this, and then you get this, and
Yep.
so the only way you can get that is by starting by meditating and looking at your dream time, and then you'll get the next key to discover that next level of application that you can go deeper into these levels of consciousness.
Yeah, I love that, Alan. So for everyone watching and listening, these are the takeaways that we can have and that we can take away from our knowledge of the ancient past. It's great to have knowledge, but without application or action on the knowledge eventually becomes useless if you're not doing anything with it. And so these are the things that we can do with it. Simple things like just starting to meditate, get to know yourself better, have some solitude and quiet to listen to the subtleties of the universe and your own inner universe, of course, right? There's so many things that we can start to do with this ancient knowledge that don't have to be so grandiose and crazy and fantastical. It can be quite simple day-to-day things, learning how to breathe properly, learning how to allow our imagination to become, instead of imagination, it becomes imaginal cognition, which I am going to keep saying. Thank you, Alan. That's going to be one that I'm going to keep rewiring and programming for myself, because I know for me that's a hurdle that I will overcome, especially with this repetition, because I was brought up in a very left brain, logical, scientific upbringing, and so that's what I'm working towards.
Another way of applying when we're standing in these ancient Egyptian temples, we can use that imaginal cognition to be transported to the past. We're in that space. There's something about being in the space that is entangled. We're entangled with all time and all space of that place. The place holds the entanglement of time. And when we stand there in those temples, we can let this cognitive awareness seep into us, and we can get visions of the past, what this was used for. And that's the real magical aspect of consciousness.
100%. That's what I plan on doing when we're in Egypt. So again, for those listening and watching, come to Egypt with us. Check it out. We'll have all those details in the show notes as well. Everything Alan mentioned, we're going to put in the show notes. Make sure you check in on that. Grab his book, Making Contact, and check out the YouTube channel. Alan's got a great YouTube channel with almost everyone that he mentioned today. Some big names, really incredible people. He's got them all on his YouTube channel. I was looking at his lineup there, and it's a dream list for me and Ancient Mysteries Unearthed, that's for sure. So definitely
I
check
just
that
saw
out.
my old John West interview. I'm going to post on there. John West was.
Oh,
Have
that's
you ever
a
met John West?
well, I wanted to. I was going to go to his Egypt tour with Robert Schock, but unfortunately he passed away. So I
What
did
a
not get to.
brilliant mind! What a character! What a fun guy! You know,
I would
like
have loved to have met him.
what do you call those academics? He called
Quackademics.
those are the people that tell you, no, Egypt is only 5,000 years old, and it was created by people crawling out of caves into saying, "Oh, let's build a pyramid."
That we
But
still can't build to this day.
we still can't build it. Exactly, we
Yeah.
still cannot. We don't even understand how it was built. It's not even we can't build it. We don't know how it's possible that those stones were put in that place. And they're just finding more hollow chambers in there.
Oh yeah, I know. Bit by bit, it just the mystery unravels and only becomes more mysterious. I mean, it's that classic adage: the more you know, the less you know, right? The more you learn, the less you know, and that's a beauty, and that's that kind of one of the nice messages I also took away from today's recording is to we can be a very arrogant species, and I think it is a humbling message to not to it's kind of a twofold thing. It's one is to not make that assumption that we know everything. We obviously do not. There's so much more to know, but to not completely, downplay our own potential and our own intellect and our own ability to know and understand through our own consciousness. We're very powerful beings, and we have all the potential to unravel these mysteries. So it's like, take a step back and then also, but know that we are really amazing and powerful beings all at the same time.
One thing I want to say about you, Chris, that maybe you'll even talk about on the show is that you're a really creative guy. Your music is really creative, and that creativity is a key into intuition and the imaginal realm. It comes from the imaginal. All that creativity comes from that place of discovery. And so that creativity will get you everywhere.
Thanks for that, Alan. When I am playing music, my brain is off. It's full
Another
switch
part of the
off,
brain. Yes, it's
right?
exactly doing it. Yes.
Oh, fantastic.
Well,
Well, thank you again. I think, oh, sorry, go ahead. What are you going to say?
bring the two parts of the brain together and be a whole brain person. I mean,
Exactly.
all of
Let's
it.
merge the yin with the yang, the light with the dark, right? Get that balance in there. So thank you again, Alan. Everyone, please take a look at the show notes, follow up on his amazing research and work. And thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Mastermind podcast from Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in, and we will catch you on the next episode. Until next time.